let's give a round of applause to be here with all of you researchers. It's exciting to me. It's a nice break from my day job. Not that I have a bad day job. You guys probably feel similar that it's good to be here. So I'm going to talk about sleep tech. And speaking of day jobs, mine is probably fairly different than most of yours. I'm at X. So what is X? X is the moonshot factory for Alphabet. So Google's a part of that. And so we're supposed to come up with radical new technologies that are going to solve really big problems. And so in that sense, this Venn diagram, huge problem, sleep, radical solution, still to be determined, and breakthrough technology still to be determined. So in that way, this really hasn't been a break from my day job. And I've been really invigorated to learn about some of these things. I think about Matt Walker's talk yesterday with Alzheimer's and slow-wave sleep connections, things about Parkinson's. Who knew you could even measure sleep in zebrafish? So to me, this has been very exciting. I spend my time looking for emerging technologies and pretty much at the intersection of neuroscience and computer science and human-computer interaction in order to come up with some of these things. So what I'm going to talk about is why consumer sleep tech matters and how to evaluate that and what's next. Now, usually I give a version of this talk in Dr. Berent and Rafael Pelayo's class with students, and so I understand why they care about consumer sleep tech. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time in your shoes. You know, like, why does it matter for you guys? I mean, why does it matter for me? I'm a sleep geek. I've been doing this for 20 years, putting everything on my forehead, in my ears, over my eyes. You know, I tried to manipulate my circadian rhythms with the SIO. So I don't know if you guys have seen this. This flashes lights and plays crazy sounds. So, you know, I'm just into it because it's just fun. And I've done various different sleep rhythms. And maybe I'm a habitually short sleeper. Maybe I'm a natural short sleeper. I don't know. Emmanuel and I talk about different things. Raphael encourages me to get more sleep. So, but that's me. And so what about you guys? Like, I know there was a talk earlier from Robson about this, and Emmanuel alluded to it, which is good. So I hope to convince you that it actually matters, and it's worth spending your time. And so in tech, we have this saying, and you guys probably have used this too, you know, for any kind of problem, there's an app for this. So I think that there's a new saying that should be said. In academia, what if I told you there's a paper for this? So I have found a paper on why consumer sleep tech matters. So let's just take a look at that. It's okay to laugh in a sleep presentation. That's my first meme. I think it's pretty good. Okay, so point number one. So consumers are obsessed with sleep as the new luxury. The number of connected devices exceeded the number of people in 2011. That's 9 years ago. And so people want to know how they're sleeping, and they're obsessed with this through apps. We saw that there's about 1,000 apps on the App Store, but it's not so much the quantity, but just even the popularity. So what this paper cited this place to recognize the ranking of apps, so I went to it just a couple days ago, and sure enough, in the health and wellness category, Calm, which is a meditation app with some sleep-focused meditations being very popular, and then just an actual sleep cycle app, very popular, and similar findings for Android as well. So the second point that this paper cites is that it can enhance the patient-clinician interaction. So, you know, I'd be curious to talk to you at the break or maybe in the panel discussion. We can hear some real-world stories. I know that I have lots of interactions with people, and people know I'm into sleep, and they ask me a lot about their apps. And so it's just good to be versed in it. So I think it's worth your time to understand. And I realize you probably have some concerns about, well, what's valid, is any good, which one should I recommend? And I hope to answer some of those things. But you have valid concerns about the accuracy of it, so that's well noted. Now, I think this is really relevant for just the research, the sheer volume of data that's out there. I'll talk a little bit more about the Oura Ring, but you know, the Oura Ring is measuring continuous heart rate variability all night, every night, on 2 hours of charge for an entire week. That's some really good technology. In addition to that, it's doing body temperature. And you know, and another paper brings up a similar point, but it brings up, you know, people are doing this in conjunction with apps that are tracking their diet, things that are tracking their mood, ovulation schedules, exercise. So there is this treasure trove of data. And in fact, one of the things that the paper pointed me to, so I learned something from it, was there are emerging companies like Fitabase that are consolidating these things. So I think you'll see this emergence of companies that will help you all be able to pull this data in and make meaningful insights of it. So that's one of the things I think we will see. But ultimately, I think the most important point the paper raised that I think in many ways is my goal today is how do we bring together? We need to build the bridge between the scientists, the technologists, and the clinicians in order to really figure out what are some of these tough problems? What are some of the things that we can do together? And in many ways, that's my goal today. And I hope that now that you know what I do in my day job, and we do fund studies, we do look for exciting labs to work with, we can find some ways to work together. Okay, one small example of that is Dr. Ken Powler from Northwestern and we combined our two loves. He's been doing targeted memory reactivation for many years. I've been doing lucid dreaming since I met Dr. Stephen LaBerge at Stanford. And we said, hey, how do we use targeted memory reactivation at night to help people to remember to wake up in their dreams? Something that I think is a lot of fun. So we built an app. And that was a good example. If you want to check that out, you can. It's on the iOS store. It has a really good dream journal. So that's probably the best thing about it. So let's move on to the tech world. How do we best evaluate these consumer sleep technologies? Really, there's two main categories. There's measurement, things that are just tracking and getting insights. And then there's devices that are trying to actually enhance the sleep. So when I first did the lecture in the Sleep and Dreams lab, the chart looked just like this. We said, look, there are ones that are action-oriented, like this. It's trying to actually make an effect on the circadian rhythm, and it does. It works. If I'm in a new time zone and I play this, at 6 a.m. of that time zone, it's very strong blue light, and it can help reset the clock. But it doesn't have any insights. There's no closed-loop feedback on it. And then there's those that are just doing the insights. They are measuring things. The Nike Fuel Band was around, the Jawbone Up. There's things that are being put under the bed. But there wasn't anything that was combining these two things several years ago. But that has now changed. And we'll talk about some of these because I think they are good examples of when science and technology came together. So we'll go into some detail. But let's start with my favorites that I think I can personally recommend based on collecting some data and comparing it to some gold standard devices. Oura Ring, $39.3 million in funding. Why does that matter? Because a lot of these companies go away, and hardware is really hard. So they need to be well funded to sort of survive the hardware iteration cycles. But it's using infrared LEDs to track the heart rate variability. It comes in 8 different sizes, so you get a sizing kit. And one of the novel things about it is it does a readiness score. So it's actually taking not just last night's sleep. You get a sleep score, but I've always thought it's kind of crazy. What does an 89 for my sleep really mean? What I like is they give you a sleep score, but then they try to predict how you're going to feel that day and give you some advice. And they do that by last night's sleep, the sleep balance over the week, yesterday's activity, the balance of activity over the week, and the body temperature and resting heart rate. So they don't publish the details of the algorithm, of course, but they are putting, I think, the right things into it. And they have done some comparison with ECG to show that there's some correlation. So Oura Ring, I think, is a good one for sleep tracking. This one, ResMed, you're probably familiar with ResMed as a company, primarily in sleep devices. They created the S Plus. That's non-contact. A lot of people don't want things over their head. They don't want things in their ears. And so this is a great solution that goes on the bedstand, uses radio waves, much like echolocation, to cite what's the changes in breathing and positional change. And they claim to have 2 million nights of data, 10 articles published. Now, ResMed shut down this line and fed it into a different company, SleepScore Labs. Basically, it's almost the same device, the same underlying technology. It's reasonably cost. You can get the S Plus still on Amazon for less than $70, which is great, and then the SleepScore Max is $150. So those are some sleep trackers that I think are good. Now let's get into the king of the wearables as it relates to actually taking action. This is really fascinating. So several years ago, researchers published there's an effect of you can actually stimulate and increase the power of the slow waves and perhaps even some of their duration. And so several companies took this research and started to productize it, and this is one of them. Very well funded, And it works something like this. So you are wearing this contraption, and it is monitoring your EEG from several different dry contact sensors and then some in the back. And as that EEG is being decoded on device, so they have, one of the trends that's emerging is you can do more machine learning on device. TF Lite is one of the frameworks that's very powerful out there. So they can do some decoding and see if you're actually in slow wave. And when you're in slow wave, they can actually play an acoustic stimulation. Now, they won't say exactly what that is. Maybe it's pink noise, maybe it's 5 milliseconds, maybe it's 15 milliseconds, maybe it's over 30 seconds. Again, some of that stuff they keep proprietary, but then they can measure, does it have an increase in the slow wave? And by the way, if there's arousal that's detecting, then obviously the algorithm's pulling back and making that. So that, I think, is a great example of technology and research coming together to make something that perhaps could make a difference. Philips Smart Sleep, same thing. Almost looks exactly the same. What I don't like about what Philips is doing, just to be fair, is they are marketing this for people who are sleeping less than 7 hours. I mentioned myself, I play around with my sleep schedules. It's one thing to do it on your own, but it's another, I think, to position it that way. So that's why I favor the Rhythm Dream. I think they just talk about staying asleep. They talk about improving sleep quality. Philips, I think, is going a little bit into, perhaps some controversial ground about advocating for less sleep. So UrgoNight, this is one of the newer things. I was at CES last year, and it caught my attention. They're using biofeedback, but to do some training prior to sleep. So again, there are many people who don't want to wear anything when they go to bed. And so is there any way that they can actually sleep better using technology? And this perhaps is one. So it has to do with improving the sensory motor waves, which is the 12 to 15 hertz frequency over the motor cortex. And they report falling asleep faster and reducing wakings. Actually, I'd be interested if there is some science behind this. I can't recommend this yet. I did wonder from yesterday's talk about the motor activity and the motor neurons that maybe there's something there. So for those that were presenting yesterday, if there's some connection with the sensory motor waves, or if others have looked into this, please let me know, because I'd like to know if this is something that's worth recommending or not. So now this, you may think, well, gosh, how do white noise generators, even belong on the same category? They're surprisingly effective for a lot of people. And if you think about it, many people want to stay asleep, right? They might be able to fall asleep and there might be issues. But staying asleep is really important. And a noise generator, it raises the noise floor. So you actually are creating this, taking advantage of the brain's ability to habituate to a sound, maybe at 50 decibels. And so then somebody slams a car outside or a car alarm goes out, and if it's at 65 decibels, that's a 5 dB change. You're not gonna do that. Versus if you were in a complete silent room and that 65 decibel sound, that's gonna hit you. Your brain's not ready for that. So I think these are an underappreciated one. And one of my personal favorites that I use every night is the Bose Sleep Buds. So there's no sensors. This is just, in many ways, low tech. But you put them in your ears, and they just play the most beautiful ambient sound. And they do the same thing. They'll go up to 70 dB, which is quite high. I probably have it about 50. And it just really works. Caveat, there are mixed reviews. Some people it works great for. People either love it or hate it. I happen to be one of the lovers of that. I'm on my third one, just to give you a chance. My dogs somehow have eaten two of my first two. So it passes the buyback test. Sometimes in technology, they talk about the turnaround test. If you leave your house and you don't have your wallet or your cell phone, most people will go back. I call it the buy again test. So if tech is good enough that I buy it again, I'm on my second Oura Ring and I'm on my third Bose Sleep Buds. So that tells you something. So let's just take a look at what comes next. Now, this is always a bit of a crapshoot. Who knows really what's coming next, even people that have been in the space a long time. But it's fun. So I thought about at least a methodology that made sense. Let's look at the past. Let's get some grounding of what's happened. Let's look at what hasn't worked in the past. The nice thing about the market is it has a tendency to correct. It has a tendency to find out what do people really want, and it funds that. And then let's look at some tech trends, and then we'll speculate. So this is the timeline. So you have to go all the way back, 2003, 2004. Nova Dreamer was, I think, the first device that you could put on your body, and that was LaBerge from Stanford trying to induce lucid dreams. But the Zeo, how many of you remember the Zeo or had a Zeo? Yeah. I think was actually a great sleep device. It was a single-channel EEG. I love the clock form factor. You know, you just put it on there and it would recharge. It would give you a score, and it certainly was decoding different states. We'll talk a little bit about why that doesn't exist today. But then you have to go all the way to 2008 with the Fitbit, and that's was the wearable boom happened pretty much then, with all kinds of things coming next. The Basis watch was a fantastic one. It had the highest correlation with PSG, about 92%. We bought a lot of those to evaluate. And then 2014 was the ResMed launch. 2015, Apple Watch, who still hasn't done a sleep app themselves, but there's plenty of third-party apps for that. 2016, right around the time of Kickstarter kicking in, you just had funding sources for these really strange devices, which is good in some ways, but then also it sort of cluttered the market, and a lot of these things, just don't even get shipped. So you have to be very careful about investing in that. So now the challenge is a lot of these haven't panned out. You know, the Red X's are the ones that are gone, and even my beloved Bose Sleep Buds in December of 2019, very recently, they have canceled that. So the question is, why? I gave a short talk at the Precision Health conference back in the fall, and if you want to see the details of that, feel free to go on YouTube. The one caveat is it was right after Game of Thrones, and so it had a Game of Thrones theme, so if you don't like that show or didn't like how it ended, you might want to pass. But good news is I'll just net it out for you. So why did they fail? Timing. So think 2003, 2004, people weren't thinking wearables. Zeo was great, but it just wasn't at the right time. I think it would do great now if it had launched now. You got to manufacture these things. I told you it's difficult to do. The Basis watch was accurate, but the green LEDs for PPG started burning people. And according to Bose Sleep Buds, the battery issues were failing, and they couldn't even correct it. So accuracy, Fitbit was sued. Comfort, the Dream 1 version 1, the Philips Smart, also not very comfortable. And to be honest, even today, I've passed out both those devices to probably a dozen people, and nobody continues to wear it. So I think there's something that's still off with the comfort, and then the cost is very high. So now, with that in mind, let's look at the last piece before we make a prediction. This is a trend. Tech is becoming more personal, no doubt. From the mainframes where we had access cards and punch cards to where we're using our hands and our fingers to make digits appear on the screen, to putting the phone in our pocket, to our wrists, to our eyes and ears. Things are moving more inside of our head, almost literally. So, with that in mind, I think we're going to see a new category of wearables, at least something that we might deserve a new term. So in 2014, hearables was coined because it was acknowledging things are going beyond earbuds. And so there's just been this explosion of things that are basically almost like small computers in your ear. Will 2020 bring the sleepable? We'll see. What I like about this term is, first and foremost, a sleepable must be sleepable. You have to be able to sleep with it. If you think about how intimate the setting of the bed is, I don't think people have really paid enough attention to this, right? If you think about what you bring into your bed, what you wear, who you have in your bed, it's a private affair. And I don't think that technologists to this point in time have really been thinking about that. So I think things like the Oura Ring, that's a sleepable in that sense, that it's very easy to use. I think the Bose Sleep Buds. But almost nothing else passes that test. So I think this is the first barrier that we're really going to have to get our arms around to do it. And if you think about the picture that Emmanuel showed of the PSG, no, that does not pass the intimacy test. Now, to give you a proof point, there is a company, Myant, an entrepreneur, Tony Kahane. He's doing smart underwear. It doesn't get any more intimate than that. So we'll see. We'll see. That was announced a couple years at CES and still hasn't shipped, but we'll be on the lookout. It has to add tangible value. For day and night at a reasonable cost. We sleep to be awake. I think that's the action-oriented piece of it. It does need clinical validation. It doesn't have to be an FDA-approved device, but they need clinical studies, like we saw with the ResMed. It needs to be research-friendly. I do think we need to push the companies, my company included, to have some transparency in algorithms and open APIs so people like yourselves can do research on it and it can pull from it. And it needs that human-first design. It's okay for low tech. every device in the last 4 years that goes through the bed has to have Bluetooth. Why? Who loves Bluetooth? That's the last thing you want to be fiddling with. You don't want to be activating those cognitive neurons to figure out how to pair something. And so, just very simple, low tech is sometimes better there. So for inspiration, you may think like, oh, is this bar for sleepables, too high? Well, as I've been giving this presentation, you probably didn't notice my glasses. If you did, you probably thought, those glasses are a little big for that guy. Maybe somebody should give him a little fashion device or something like that. Raphael said, yeah, I think you had a different... Yeah, he's like, I've never seen you wear these before. I think you had a better glass. Well, I've actually been monitoring my brainwaves in real time while I give this talk. So these are the low-down focus Smith glasses. And let's see if I still have, speaking of Bluetooth, yes. So you can see. So this is an example of, I think, some tech that is well done. And so they're actually using sensors here. These are conductive polymers around the ear, and you have the left and right, so you get the eye movements, and then the reference is in the base there. So this, I think, is just an example of where tech can go when you pull together the researchers, you bring some technologists, and what this has done, obviously probably from the Smith company themselves, the human factors. And that's the piece that's been missing that will make these products that will really come into our beds and be most effective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the wonderful talk.
Awesome. That's cool. How do you see this, again, as a bias for one of the things that we as clinicians see is consumers overwhelmed sometimes with the massive information that some of the wearables may generate. My question to you is, how do you think we should deal with that? Because as we know, sleep is very counterintuitive. The more people end up kind of getting into it, the more anxious they get about it. So that is one. How would you foresee with dealing with this? Then from the other side, how do you see some actionable items for a healthcare provider? To get, listen, I have this data, now how do we move forward? Just broader view.
Yeah. So the question is, how do we sort of distill this down for the consumers and point to it? I think that, somebody was showing a paper, I think maybe even in yours, you showed a paper of trying to get a cross-validation study of multiple devices. So I do think, even though I was kind of joking, there's a paper for this, there weren't enough papers. Most of the stuff that I've had to do to see if this Oura Ring is working or stuff, I've had to do it myself with my own equipment and stuff. So one, I do think we need to have more published studies, and I hope that I've encouraged some of you, or at least you can pass it on to colleagues, that we should do some of that, because I think the benefit will be there. There's a little bit of down benefit for that. Second, actually Raphael was one that has recommended things like the Basis watch to me. You were the first to tell me about that. I think even ResMed S Plus. And so he happens to be a clinician and practitioner who is state abreast on it and can make those recommendations. And so I think if that medical community can embrace it, learn a little bit about it, and make those recommendations, it'll help the consumer world. I think that the third piece is there is a trend. So the Apple Watch, I've talked to cardiologists, and they actually really respect the Series 4 watch and the ECG of it. And so I think that you're going to see, Apple and others, Google is making a big investment in health. There's going to be more credibility in these devices, and so I think it'll just naturally flow from that.
Here. Just here. It's more a couple of comments. The first one is a word of advice, when you talk about those wearables. To register sleep is good, but, this slow wave inducers, whatever, we don't know what brain waves do. I would never recommend anyone to do that, especially on a chronic basis, until one day we have a very good idea of what cortical synchronicity does. We have ideas, but it's just like, this is dangerous. It could be. The second one is more like a thought about, instead of recording sleep, recording the quality of wake. That will impact sleep. So, here you bypass the whole bed problem, intimacy, and just say, so if you increase your wake consolidation, wake quality, you will have better sleep. So maybe, one way to just find new tech without all the problem of sleep recording is wake recording.
I think that's an excellent point. In fact, in that talk that I gave at Stanford, I said pretty much we have a great device that people are interacting with. Jamie Zeitzer shared some research that he had done with the response time to Bing search queries, and he could predict fatigue just based on how long it took people to click on a response. So I think that you're absolutely right. There's already work at MIT that's doing mood based on emoticons. You can imagine PVT like surrogates with typing speed, spelling mistakes. So I think getting that sort of daytime score and having some sort of nighttime measurement, you could imagine a closed loop feedback that really is trying to optimize your sleep quality. Yeah, great, excellent point.
In fact, it was almost a follow-up. So I get, because I really agree with Philippe that one part that really is forgotten a little bit is to monitor wake. Because we know that there's sleep attacks during wake, there's qualities of wake, there's concentration. There's probably a lot more information about EEG during wake that's really completely unknown. And maybe if there were a way to monitor, sleep, EEG during wake, at the same time, it's slightly different problems. The wake problems, you want to measure microsleep, maybe concentration, etc., the quality of wake. In sleep, you want to measure sleep disorders and sleep disruption. It's slightly different, but I think ideally we would want a device that can be worn for 24 hours. For us, for example, for anybody with sleep, that's why I like your glasses.
Yeah, and you can just verify. We'll see. Is it really recording or day?
Yeah. Yes, but I can tell if you're really smart or not.
So I did this in part because it's kind of fun, but I thought you could think about getting some of these for your labs and doing something. Like you can imagine this wouldn't be too hard to nap in. It comes in sunglasses, so it can be the shade. But totally agree. So thank you. Thank you again.